out to be completely unreliable assholes.
Tim.
Don't do it.
Tim.
Oh, no.
It worked. Here you are. Good to see you, Tim. Hey.
I've appeared.
Good to feel you there, everyone listening. Sorry we can't see you the same. Maybe if I knew all your names, I'd summon you as well, and we'd see you. Anyways, all the same, welcome to Dismembering Horror, specifically episode 160 of Dismembering Horror. It is, we are, you are, we are all together, the podcast show where myself, Ryan McDuffie, and
myself, Tim Aslin.
Indeed, we watch a horror film, the spirit of friends getting together to watch a horror film, and in that same spirit of friends getting together, we talk about it. We dismember it. And dismembering means, well, we talk about what worked for us, what did not work for us, and anything else may not fit into those exact categories that we found interesting or noteworthy. We love it when you submit a film. We got a big list of films that we just want to, see for the first time or revisit that we pull from a hat. Or sometimes our skull bike bell goes off and we go see a new release film, which is the case of today's episode, slapping a 2021 year next to the film in question. Indeed, we went and saw Candyman. Isn't that right, Tim?
Boy, is it. It's so right.
Cool. Anything else to say on what we're doing here, Tim? Good context to have.
I would say that this film encapsulates for me pretty precisely like the goal of the podcast, in that it's an example of achieving a film that achieves basically for me all of the things that I am looking for in a horror film. I'm not saying it's a perfect film, but it's pretty well doing or satisfying the desire that I have when I go into a horror film in totality. So I'm just like, oh, hey, somebody made a new horror film that did that, and we've had those before. Midsommar does it, but like, it's nice and refreshing to know that there's, more horror, new horror that does that. You don't have to just go back to old things.
Great. And you're kind of putting that under the context of for our show here. We're always, of course, hoping to uncover the gold, whether it's new or old, just something we haven't seen. That's kind of the spirit of the show, is we feel like we're on the hunt. We're on the dig. We're on the excavation, so to speak.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I feel like we could jump into our trailer unless there's anything else.
No.
Great. Yeah, we like to, watch, at least play the partial trailer for you of whatever we watched, sort of set the mood here. So, directed by Nia DaCosta, with a screenplay by Jordan Peele, Win Rosenfeld, Nia DaCosta, based on Candyman, the film by Bernard Rose, which was then based on The Forbidden by Clive Barker. Here we go.
None other.
From 2021, sequel to the film of the same name from, when was it?
92, I think.
Yeah. Cool. Candyman.
Here we go.
This is where it all began. The story of Candyman. Local character, he walk around handing out candy to the neighborhood kids. One day, a couple of kids get razor blades in their candy. Police come around. That's when I saw the true face of fear.
Get on your knees. Hands! Hands! Hands!
They beat him, tortured him, killed him, right there on the spot. A couple weeks later, more razor blades and more candy. He been innocent.
So he's real?
Candyman ain't a he. Candyman's the whole damn hive. If you're out here looking for Candyman, you ask me, stay away.
I feel really connected to this story.
Go on.
Right here, in this neighborhood, the legend started.
Uh-huh.
And the legend is, if we say his name 5 times while looking in the mirror, we could summon him.
Summon the Candyman. Hell no.
Cool. I'm glad, as always, I kind of avoid watching trailers for movies I want to see, but that was a really good trailer. It was cool.
Yeah, I had not watched any trailers for this, so I was pretty well going in blind. What I did do is watch the original movie 2 days ago, just to make sure I didn't, I didn't know whether they were connected or if it was a reboot or a continuation or whatever, but I had read somewhere within the last couple of years that Tony Todd was going to be involved. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know how they're going to do that, but I might as well watch the first one just as a refresher. And so I'm extremely glad I did that, because I would have I remember when I saw the first Candyman, it was 1998. It was 1998. I was a freshman in college, and I saw it in my friend's basement. Like we had gone off campus and like had a weekend in New England, wherever they lived. And I remember watching it and feeling like I didn't get it, and never watched it again. That was the only time I'd ever seen it. So like going in, getting it, like, a refresher on it. And I mean, really, in a way, watching it for the first time, to be honest, like as an adult, I was actually quite thrilled with the original. So I got doubly excited to see this new installment. So that's all to say, I'm gonna rate it. Okay. Just so you know, I'm gonna go right into rate it. It's a buy. I think this is one of the best horror films I've seen in a long time. Like, it's right up there with Hereditary, Us, Get Out, Midsommar, The Lighthouse. Of modern horror. Like, this is what I want.
Awesome. I kind of like in that spirit of when we've reviewed those films. And like, I'm always cautious because I'm still digesting it and I want to give it a rent, but then I always end up being a buy. That's exactly where I'm at now. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a buy to save myself later on, assuming I'm going to go on the same trajectory. I'm still kind of like figuring it out for myself. Like, there's aspects I clearly loved, and then nothing I didn't like, but just things I'm kind of just still sorting out how I feel. Yeah. I don't know. I just always need to see stuff a second time, especially if it's something that it's going to grow to really love. But
this movie it's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
I mean, thematically complex on so many levels that I almost am like, there's a part of me even like just thinking about before we recorded or started recording today, I was like, I'm not even sure that I'm equipped to like sit down and talk about it at length, because it's so complex in a realm that really like I'm not personally connected to. So it becomes I worry about becoming sort of too academic from the outside perspective when talking about things like race. And so I mean, I'll do my best.
Right.
But I in no way presume to be any sort of expert or presume to have context for that experience.
Right. Like,
Right? Because I don't.
We have each other for this episode, but I don't know if that's saying a lot.
Exactly.
Would have been good
Two
to have,
white dudes.
Yeah, could have been good to have a guest
So-
on.
But what I realized when I was watching it is that, I guess, in spite of that lack of connection to that experience of being Black in the US in particular, at least getting introduced or expanded on the realities of what Black people in our country have gone through just hits me so strongly and makes me really sad. Just to be like, wow, like they, in a large way and systemically and intergenerationally, have just been fucked with for, like an ineloquently, put. But that's how I just go, God damn. How awful.
Yeah.
But on I guess the flip side, I am like moved that artists are stepping into a mainstream space, in particular in the genre, world of horror, and combining the commentary and deeply emotional storytelling with a realm of film that I love, which is horror. So I don't know. All in all, I'm like, holy shit, this movie it's intensely deep and affecting and also really good horror. So awesome.
Yeah. I saw it maybe just a bit more of my experience of going into it and watching it. I maybe last saw the first one like 2 years ago. So it was just kind of at that cusp where like it was recent enough. I didn't feel like I had to watch it again. But after, getting so stoked on this new one, of course, I wish I had. And I was just, I've been thinking about it since I saw it maybe about 5 days ago. Where I was like looking up the sequels, just, I don't know, even though I'm sure they're terrible, like I'm just so in the mood of just wanting to like see all that there is out there. Tony Todd's in both of them. I just want to see them. Yeah, I was just, as far as my experience, just sort of my in summary review, I'm leaning towards buy it now, or that's why I'll say it now. That's my rating. It's just the thing that always gets me first and foremost in a horror movie is the mood and atmosphere, and just the effectiveness of those horror moments in that context of a greater atmosphere. So that's all I'll say on that for now. That's sort of all we need to say up front for surrounding our rating and experience. We like to give a summary to see what we even got out of this, how we followed it, just kind of all get on the same page here. How you feeling about doing that, Tim?
Okay.
What is Candyman? What is Candyman 2021?
Okay. With oh man, it's important. Actually, it's not important. You do not have to have seen the first movie to experience this movie fully, but it does help. Like, it's kind of a cool context to have, but you really don't need it because they do enough to provide the plot points of the original in a really cool way, which we'll get into later. But having said that, I think, in the original, you have a grad student who is doing her thesis on basically on the projects of Chicago, in particular, one project called Cabrini Green. And there is lore about this entity called Candyman. The lore is, if you say his name 5 times into a mirror and then turn out the light, he'll appear behind you. And that lore extends into all sorts of different sort of versions of who this entity is. And, it takes different forms and takes sort of the place of like explanation for crimes and murders that happen in that area. And so, it's a folklore thing. So that student explores that. Turns out it's true. Well, at least in her space. And she goes through a trying time and ends up dying because of it. Okay, that's the first movie.
You just summed up the first Candyman as she goes through a trying time.
Yeah.
Not untrue.
Okay, so let's get that out of the way. That's the base context, right? So in this movie, here we go. In Candyman 2021, we're in Chicago again, and we get a slightly different context for the Candyman story, as folklore tends to be, has lots of different kind of versions, and those versions typically suit, the storyteller. In this version, we've got early Cabrini Green, maybe it looks like it's maybe the 80s, I would say. Early 80s, maybe even 70s. But either way, a young kid, there's cops are looking for a guy who had an actual prosthetic hook hand, not a one that's been jammed into his arm as a punishment. Because there had been an account, and this is true, this actually happened. There had been an account of somebody putting razor blades into some candy, I think over the Halloween trick-or-treat sort of season. And that got a lot of press I think it was the 80s. And in Chicago, there were people who they tried to target and go after and, assumed were the culprits, and often that was black men. And this guy in particular, who had been known in the area of Cabrini Green as the Candyman because he liked to give candy out to kids, had the prosthetic hook hand.
And there's also a candy factory right there, I gathered.
Oh, yeah, I missed that. Is that? Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But sure. That's cool.
I think I got that from the new one, either in one of the... Yeah, never mind.
And so anyway, so they're, the cops are looking for this guy, and we follow a young child into the exact Cabrini Green housing project from the original film, which is a nice detail. So we know right away, like, we're at least in the exact same place, which is really cool. So what ends up happening is that kid yells because he gets scared by this guy who has effectively gone on the run because he knows the cops are looking for him. But there's nothing to suggest that he actually was the culprit of putting razor blades into the candy. It's more so just he's the patsy that the cops decided to go after because it's convenient and easy. And why wouldn't you go after, a black man, in Chicago? That's a fairly common trope, without a whole lot of evidence to support your, accusation, so to speak. So they do, and they beat him to death violently when they find him, and the kid presumably feels guilty for kind of being the one who led them inadvertently, but led them to the guy who's trying to hide out in the wall of Cabrini Green. Okay, so this will come back, but the actual bulk plot of this Candyman is that's sort of the thread that ties the first movie and this movie together. But so in this movie, we've got an artist, a young artist, who's got, what would you call it? Painter's block?
Yeah,
I guess. Sure.
That gets at it.
He's dating an up and coming art manager slash, I think that's what you would call her, right?
Yeah.
And he's struggling to find his new sort of like artistic expression. And he is keyed into the folklore of the Candyman and Cabrini Green and murders at Cabrini Green over the years. So he starts investigating that, which is fun for him. And this inspires him. And he gets really into the folklore about it and down the rabbit hole. And he starts painting again, which is great for him. But he's too cavalier about the lore, and he does the thing that sets all of this in motion, which is he says Candyman 5 times in the mirror with his girlfriend protesting. And that, of course, conjures the Candyman, the version of Candyman that we've been given through this kids' folklore. It's not Tony Todd of the previous film. That lore was of a man in the late 1800s who was also a painter, who had fallen in love with a subject, a woman who he had been asked to paint a portrait of, a white woman. And because he got her pregnant, he was killed violently and had his hand cut off and a hook put in place of it and tortured and ultimately killed.
Killed with bees.
Yeah, so they poured honey on him after they met, what do you call it?
Discovered.
Mutilated him.
Yeah.
And he was stung to death by bees. That's the Candyman of the first movie. So in this one, we're dealing with a different, although very similar, somebody who is sort of wrongfully murdered. I guess everybody who's murdered is wrongfully murdered, aren't they? That's the whole idea of murder. Anyway, so man, this is a long one. Here we go. Still going. So in this movie, we've got a different Candyman, but similar construct. And our painter artist friend starts to kind of go crazy, maybe. He gets kind of possessed with the ideas of the Candyman. He makes his art wrapped up in those ideas. He presents an art piece that is literally a mirror and asks people to say Candyman 5 times in that mirror. Behind that mirror, which is a nice callback to the first movie, where they traveled through behind bathroom mirrors to get into the sort of hidden space of the old projects. He hangs his new art in a gallery showing. And this then sort of starts a cascade of people learning about this lore, saying Candyman, getting murdered, and all of those murders kind of tie back to him.
Anthony. I want to use their
Anthony,
names.
right.
Yeah.
And Anthony, meanwhile, also, who is in his search and sort of research, he's been stung by one of Candyman's bees, and that bee sting infects and grows. The infection grows up through his hand into his arm, into kind of his neck and body, and is kind of taking him over as, a visual representation of the possession of, or whatever you want to call it, of the lore or of the entity that is Candyman. So yeah, what do I do? Yada, yada, yada. Candyman kills a bunch of people. Anthony spirals. It kind of all leads to him and a person he had become sort of friends with, in researching the lore. He had met this guy who runs a laundromat in and around Cabrini Green.
William Burke.
Yes, and Burke has now given him a lot of information about that lore. We find out that Burke is the child from the opening that had sort of inadvertently gotten this Candyman killed in the 80s. And turns out he's kind of lost it too. And Anthony's girlfriend, whose name was what? Damn,
Brianna.
where is it?
Brianna.
Oh, Brianna, that's right. She gets wrapped up in it, obviously, because she's sort of trying to figure out what's up with her boyfriend. And we are led to this moment where Burke effectively has fallen in, I don't know, I mean, he's kind of lost his mind in that he's wrapped up in the many facets of the lore of Candyman, and he's turning or helping to turn Anthony into a new version of Candyman. Which then gives us a nice sort of final girl sequence. Although we'll talk about why this particular way of depicting a final girl is some of the best stuff ever. And she ultimately gets away. But her boyfriend, Anthony, does suffer a fate of turning into a new Candyman.
And can you explain for me?
There's so much more. I don't even know.
And can you help me out with just something that I could use some clarification on? What when so Burke is wants to turn Anthony into a new Candyman? Like, what exactly is his aim there? Like, isn't it something about getting vengeance or?
Yeah, I think what it is what he explains is that there have been many, many, if not countless examples of Black men who have been killed wrongfully at the hands of white men or white people. And that has sometimes or often created this vengeful spirit that we collectively have kind of identified or given the label of Candyman to over the years. So like maybe not always having that label, but there are quote unquote many Candyman versions over the years. And really that's just what they're saying is that's a label for Black men who have been wrongfully killed by white people, and the spirit that lives on, the vengeful spirit that lives on, we're going to call Candyman. So there have been a lot of them. They give a bunch of examples, right? Like he says that Tony Todd's version, which is, the character's name is, oh God, now I forget, but starts with an R. Daniel Robitaille. He was sort of the first one, and then in the early 1900s, there was a kid who was riding his bike who looked at a white girl wrong and got accused, and this is very Emmett Till feeling. He was killed, and he became a Candyman. And there, so he lists off a handful of examples of this, and he's saying that Anthony now is going to become the new one. I have a theory, not theory, but I have a sense of kind of thematically why that's relevant to have Burke wanting to create the Candyman. He basically sets Anthony up to be killed by the cops, like almost in a prescient way. He's like, this is what's going to happen because this is what always happens. But he's orchestrating it, which creates this new layer of it's just dark. It's just really messed up that you would think he would want to not, as a Black man, he would not want to, continue that trend or be a part of continuing that trend. But I think that creates a really interesting, thing to discuss. But ultimately, that's what he does. He creates a scenario. He calls the cops and says, hey, there's a crazy guy with a hook for a hand, and he's killing people, and you need to get here, so that the cops will show up and shoot him on sight, which is exactly what ends up happening. And by doing that, he creates the new Candyman that Anthony is the sort of...
Right. I followed all that. I was just a little unclear on like what his motivation was. I missed that part of his speech.
I think Yeah, I mean, I think that his motivation is this is a thing that has always existed, and I'm going to continue that thing on. I'm going to be a part of continuing that thing on so that we can have this vengeful spirit going around and exacting its vengeance on people who do shitty shit.
Okay.
That's my sense of it.
Cool.
I'm not sure he really explicitly says but that's my sense of it.
Great.
So then that happens, and then Anthony's girlfriend, what did we say her name was? Brianna, gets away.
All right. Shall we move on?
Was that the longest one I've ever done?
I think so. It may be tied. All right. Here we go then for our next big section here.
Oh, wait, I forgot a part that's really important. Anthony. The reason he's connected to Candyman and the Candyman lore in the first place is because he is the baby that Candyman kidnapped in the first movie, and that Helen, the grad student, ended up saving from the bonfire.
Yes,
that's an important detail and very much ties the movies together.
Agreed. Great. All right, then with that, here we go. Next section. What worked?
What worked? What worked for you? What worked for you? What worked for you?
It worked like a charm, Smith.
What worked? What worked for you?
What worked, Ryan? All of those things that I just mentioned.
Right. Well, just to get out of the way, since it was a thread you already started, and it's one that, yeah, as you said, maybe we can't speak to too much, just to get out of the way. Just that if you're going to say something about historical racism, it was so smart to just not have it rooted in this one 1800s case up until now, but just nope, this has just been going on through every generation. There's been multiple ones. I thought that was really smart.
Yeah, I think maybe the thing I love the most and am affected by the most in this movie is the underlying sense of intergenerational trauma that exists within the Black community in America, in the U.S.
Yeah, and so
it's so, I mean, it's so well constructed to give you a sense of that I was like, okay, this is really hard and heavy and sad and moving and all of those things.
So upfront too, God, I mean, awkward's too small of a word. I was going to say awkwardness, trying to live with it all, but just these, like, I just thought getting into gentrification specifically was so smart. Just as far as like, well, here they are now living in this same area. They have money and can afford these apartments. It happens to be in the same location. It just acknowledges that that's a lot to take in.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the whole movie has these constant kind of diametric aspects of like what world Black people are, are quote unquote allowed to sort of live in. There's all these gatekeepers in this movie. I tell you, the art critic in particular, the scene where she just completely trashes his art and says, "Oh yeah, it's all the same kind of thing." Gentrification, like artists have always talked about gentrification or like made their art about that, and I can't remember exactly what she says, but it made me so mad in the moment because I was just like, this is the same shit over and over again. These like critics walking in and acting like they know what that experience is like and then judging it because that's their job. And it just made me fucking, I was so angry. And so later her turning, and because there are murders that happened, suddenly being interested in his art and thinking it's good. I was like, I hate this. I hate her. I hate everything about it. I hope she dies. It was the perfect sort of, tone for that stuff.
Wow, that's I think it speaks to your anger that even when she comes around, you hate her more.
Yes.
So
Yes,
that
because
means
it's
she's
parasitic,
absolutely
right?
She's absolutely irredeemable, though, in that sense.
100%. I don't. Yeah. Because it's such bullshit. I went. I recently went to a gallery showing, and my girlfriend, who is a fine artist, and it's really interesting to walk into those spaces because there's a lot going on. And like you see all these different personalities, like in particular in LA. This is not true everywhere, but in LA, you see a thing that exists of people being there to be seen rather than to actually consume the art. And it's such a weird vibe.
Velvet Buzzsaw kind of touched on all this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's very in that realm. But I really, that having this movie revolve or like live in that world and the world of the projects or the history of the projects in Chicago, that dichotomy of those two worlds was, I think, incredible setup to use because we get everything we need to know, but it also creates what kind of, I think what you were starting to get at. It creates this almost confusion. Maybe confusion is the wrong word, but like this paradox, I guess, of like the characters we're watching, who are all Black, are living in really nice places, right? Like they've surpassed the trope of the disenfranchised artist who has to live in poverty to make their way, as a what do you call it? A rite of passage or something in order to get further up the chain. Like we've passed that era of these characters' lives, if it existed at all, which, I think they suggest that it did. But in doing that, we still see that there are these gatekeepers surrounding them constantly and telling them what they need to do in order to make good art or to be successful. So it never ends. Like, I love that about this. You can live in a beautiful condo, apartment, whatever it is, in an amazing part of town, and yet there will, in the world we live in, there will still be these assholes that will surround you and use you for what's good for them, and at the same time tell you that you're not good enough, or tell you to your face that you are good enough if it serves them.
Yeah.
And like, man, all of the scenes that deal with that, that's not even the Candyman stuff. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the baseline of the world that these characters live in. And that's horrifying as in and of itself.
Yeah.
So, man, there's a lot.
Well, and I think you mentioned this up front, but I mean, what worked for me, and maybe I'm sure there's more to it, and I could be off in some ways, but just trying to think like thematically why artist as protagonist as artist for this. And I think you said it with like, it's you're in communication with your history and your present, and trying to process that in some way that is going to have some kind of positive result. That, and that there's all sorts more, that's just a huge discussion on purpose of art. But
oh my God, right.
Yeah, but
it's so smart to have the main character have become an artist, right? Because there is this inherent connection to the original movie in which that Candyman was originally an artist. He was a painter. And to have this character, our main character, Anthony, also be a painter, not only is just a nice, I guess, contrivance, if you want to call it that or downplay it, but like, it's nice to have that, but it says so much about what broadly, thematically, we're talking about, which is how the people who have experienced these traumas and intergenerational trauma often are not the people who tell the story, who create the narrative about that experience. But historically speaking, the people who maybe are best suited to create that narrative and tell that story tend to be artists and tend to be, through their art, they are actually able to actionably create that narrative. So the act of creation as a painter, as an artist in general, on a micro level, Anthony is doing that. On a macro level, the filmmakers are doing that, right? And so, I think that single choice is one of the smartest things about this movie.
Yeah, micro,
because
macro,
and
meta.
Yeah, meta.
Sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's just genius.
I'm thinking about, too, it's making me think how I just thought it was so... Well, just smart in the sequel sense, just you take that baby from the first one and he's our guy for the new one. But then on top of that, just, tying to these themes and whatnot, there's just so much going on with, at any given moment, we're just all living this, in context with just a horrible, horrible history. And when you're a person of color, and the characters in the story and Anthony here, you just... that trauma, whatever it all is just multitudes worse, right?
Yeah.
So there's just something about him not knowing about his history as a baby and discovering this whole incident that happened and having that direct connection to it. That's a mystery to him that he has to go and dig up from his mother and all that. I don't know if it's a metaphor, but just ties into all that really well. About in relation to one's history.
Exactly. It's this thing that I think so many people are told this. In particular, I think marginalized people have been told this by white people or non-marginalized people often. We didn't tell you the truth because we wanted to protect you. That concept is so dangerous and just so horrible. People need to know the truth. And this extends through everybody, right? Because you see it all the time. You see it's used as a political tool constantly, right? Right now it's happening in certain states. Legislation is going through or being pushed to prevent the actual truth of histories, the ugly truths of American history, is being taken out of curriculum because people think they want to, quote unquote, protect their children from those ugly truths. So they're going to eliminate that reality of history. That's so counter to the idea of getting in touch with the things that have happened that grow empathy for other people in the world.
Right. I think just why that's so flawed, but at the same time acknowledging the instinct is a way to put it.
Sure.
Is you can say, I think people with that instinct, it's just that they see zero hope at all. They're just completely hopeless of how do we even get out of this situation with this kind of history? How do we build from here? So they just would rather think, erase it, start anew. But the thing is, you can't do that from... you have to be accurate. You have to know where you're coming from. Even though maybe we don't, it's hard to picture what the answer is. Let's say if there is, how to best carry forth or whatever. It's, we know it's rooted in at least acknowledging the reality of what happened. It's not erasing it. So, and
this movie says this right up front. One of the first scenes when we get this it's kind of an expositional scene of Anthony and Brianna's brother and his boyfriend are all having a little drink dinner party, get together. And the brother, they're talking about the apartment and that's really nice and sort of talking about Cabrini Green and projects and all that. And they say, forget the exact line, but he says something about like, yeah, you just sort of they knocked it down to cover up the history of it all and just built something up on top of it and moved on. That is exactly what we're talking about, right? Like just because you like got rid of a thing doesn't mean the thing is gone. You're just ignoring it. You're just pretending that it's gone.
The root of so many horror movies is like putting the evil in this chest and burying it underground, or you know, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's gonna get dug up.
Yeah,
and it's gonna get opened.
Like
so,
the troll in Ernest Scared Stupid.
That's right. So acknowledge it, and then maybe you'll take back the power a little bit. Maybe. Anyway, so I mean, the thing is like we could go on and on and on because this movie is just it's so layered with these things.
Well,
throughout.
We'll keep touching on it all, but I mean, I just wanted to mention the thing that was the biggest thing for me, as I said, in any horror movie, is that mood and that atmosphere and how that all adds up. You know, use your words again, macro and micro. In the micro sense, that then extends to where you can have specific moments where just it's all culminating, where you get a genuine sense of just eeriness or inexplicableness of something supernatural. And in this, it's just doubly the fun of the context of kind of being a slasher intensity over it all in these moments too.
Yep. Well, and man, I mean, even like we haven't even gotten it really into the movie. I mean, like I'll backtrack even further. The opening credits of the movie showing all of them in like a mirrored form is almost also exactly. It's not to the point.
Sorry, it's not the credits, to clarify. It's like the studio logos at the beginning.
Right. It's doing the micro thing of, hey, we're in a Candyman movie and Candyman lives behind the mirror. But also doing the macro or meta thing of like often the person that the story is about is trapped kind of behind the mirror and you know, the storyteller is on the other side deciding the narrative. That's a weird way of putting it. But
yes,
you know, like I think there is a bigger metaphor to having, you know, being on the other side of the mirror.
Totally.
Just like Jack Bauer in Mirrors.
Well, you know what? I had to think of that movie when you're just thinking of you do a movie where a large part of the conceit, or most of the conceit of the killer in this case that's been set up, where it's got to do with behind a mirror, only appears in a mirror, invisibility. That's kind of what I was talking about too when I said the extension from the mood and atmosphere to the kills specifically, where it's like you can't. I don't know. It's just interesting where it's at a point where it's like even though we've seen it a bunch of times and like we feel like we all know what it is to kind of do that device, let's say, of a killer in the reflection. It's just good. I mean, this one, you there's no way around the idea. There's no way around that being a trope or so much. But when you just do it and just sort of overlook any of that and just embrace it as the conceit, I mean, it just still totally works. You're just doing a good job of it. Like every time there was just, you know, the thing, and I say things like we've seen before, but yet we're just working so well of like, whether it's we see him spooking by in the reflection and then grab someone, but then when we cut to them not in the reflection, they're being like eerily but just aggressively, violently like pulled back and held by the unseen force, who we then cut back to. Good. Or the hook in the reflection going across the neck, but then, you know, nothing's there when it's going across.
Right.
I mean, just to get out of the way, this is all what we're on to. I think my favorite moment in the film, just as far as what I felt like I'm most affected. I'm looking at like, you know, like I've said in other supernatural films where we watched, where I feel like a camera's just captured a ghost on film kind of thing, and I get chills from it. It was the moment, I think it was in the girl's bathroom at the end of that kill when she's looks into I think it's just her looking to the reflection of the thing that falls on the floor.
Yeah, the little compact mirror.
Yeah, and the way he's gliding across.
Oh, it's like, so good.
That And that's the stuff that I love too about not just films but horror films specifically, is just the behind the scenes sense of like figuring out, okay, what's the speed of his hover that just feels right, like for just something that I just get so excited about that all. That's
how do we hone in on the eeriest version of this? Like what is the speed that gets our skin to like crawl?
And just the fact that there is something that like we can, that feels correct to that for something that we don't actually have a source to reference for, like what that would feel or look like.
Finding the perfect amount of unnaturalness.
Yeah. Oh my, I loved it. And then just to say too, since you touched on the beginning a bit, you talk about the opening cards in reverse. The opening credits, another thing that I feel like, well, this isn't a long-standing trope, but I feel like a new kind of device that's used a lot in modern horror a lot is the flipped camera, the being over 180 degrees. But again, like it works so well for this. It's just so on point. I'm talking about like the opening credits with just all the buildings are from this reverse perspective. But I will say on top of that, and this is an overall thing through the whole movie, but I just noticed from then and there, I'm like, ooh, why is this upside down stuff working so well in addition just to itself and how it's shot? The color correction, Tim, like it keyed in on something so good where it's like, it's not, I don't know how to describe it. It's just, it's pleasing. It didn't feel like cheap, like, oh, just put a filter over it and it makes it scary. No. It was legitimately like creepy and set the tone and atmosphere and all that. I was just really impressed with that.
Yeah, it's an interesting, man, whoever did the color correction and the cinematographer, like they absolutely like excel on the highest level of creating crisp visual atmosphere in a mildly desaturated tone, but still maintaining a color palette that is super warm. Like it's all sort of autumn warmth colors. Everything's in these like really warm yellows, browns, reds. It's not like grainy. It's not like sometimes you see like that desaturated thing and it just all becomes grayscale, which I hate. It's not that at all. Yeah, I just don't like it. Maggie, oh my God. That's like one of the worst culprits of that thing. So it's not that, because you know what it kind of feels like to me? I'm not by any means an expert in this, so I may be kind of speaking out of turn, but it feels like film, or at least some type of older vintage film vibe. I don't know why I think that, but
I don't know. I think it's the opposite. It's new, it's future, it's progressing, it's taking what came before. Like how you described all those elements, I think were exactly on point, where it's doing this, yet it's also doing this visually. It's using colors. Yes, it also feels kind of desatted, because it is embracing that clean, crisp, modern, way cameras can shoot. So that's what excites me about it too.
I don't know. I don't know how to describe that thing. One way or the other, it's incredibly well done. And there is color in it. It's not like, there are colors like bright reds, bright blues. Like there's a lot of that. There's neons and all that stuff, but it is incredible. I want to say one thing about the building shot, like the upside down building shot. The putting it, not being able to see the tops of the buildings because the cloud layer is hanging low, but in our perspective is essentially the floor of the shot. It was so striking to me and affecting to me, because first of all, it was very disorienting. They were at an angle that we really haven't quite seen before. I haven't. we've seen upside down shots, and they do what they do, and often they do it well. We saw it in Midsommar, right? But that's a really balanced, like symmetrical upside down shot.
Climax is another one, yeah.
Yeah, Climax does it. That's right. This does it in such a way that it felt like the buildings were like coming out of a pool of fog.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is happening? But then on a metaphorical level, I don't even, like, I could go on and on and on of like trying to figure out why it's so affecting and like the metaphor of it. But like, I'm not going to, because it's, I would just talk in circles. But whatever it is so, it's just so pleasingly unsettling.
Yeah. Well, I think
you can do that.
Maybe I'll succinctly put a metaphor, which is like, we think of buildings as your skyscrapers, you're building up. It's progress. It's supposed to represent like positive and forward thinking and all that the human spirit can achieve. Yet we know the inverse of all that is very much true in the human condition in today's society. So it's just like, nope, as long as we're building up, we're just as much still digging a hole down. And yeah, exactly. And like the actual perspective is from somebody on the ground looking up to these things, but we are seeing it upside down. Right. So in effect, that person who is on the ground, the quote unquote, lowest level person, if you want to call it that, in this shot is now looking down onto the elite, the people who have achieved something, right? Yeah. Because they're at the top of the buildings. Which it's just a way of getting you to look at familiar objects in a fresh light, which is literally like my favorite thing about filmmaking, probably. Right. And it's just like making someone feel like they can an object they see every day, something they're so familiar with, getting them to look at it like they're an alien from another planet who's just been dropped down and seen this thing for the first time. Yeah. And having the buildings in that fog or cloud cover sort of implies that those people who have gotten to that place of achievement, or whatever you want to call it, are being drowned in the pool of the sky, I guess, which is, man, it's just really good. I don't know. Like it says a lot. All right. Or it evokes a lot. Other broad things, if we're still there, that worked for me. Just the whole, like when you're dealing with the supernatural, to have that perfect balance of, you can describe something, like the origin of something, where it's like, it's never described too much to cross a line of somehow allowing you to go, oh, it's just this. Okay, got it. It's always, what am I trying to say? Like, where somehow the more we learn about it, just makes it more unknowable at the same time. Like what is he? Like we get where it's just all these blurry lines between he's fear, tension, racism, all that, just tension, just incarnate. Mm-hmm. Yet also a ghost, yet also just people who have lived, who have been alive and then died. It's just all that. It just gets at that. That's just a sort of, even though they're separate, they become a unified force in a way. I don't know, man. It's just, yeah. I mean, if I had to try to like define it, I would say that the Candyman is a embodiment of intergenerational trauma. Right. But then even then, like, well, what is that? There's no... Right. Well, I don't know. In this case, it's a vengeance spirit, I guess. Right. And even there, you have to say, I guess. Like, what is he? Yeah. What is it? Like, what is this? It's an icon. I don't know. But then it's so good. What rings true about it is we get that, all that... Like all how you just put it, there is a genuine force and power behind that like we can buy into. Absolutely. It's all powerful enough to then create this spirit or whatever too. Oh man, it's so good. Yeah. I mean, and then using the
the design, this sort of puppetry design. How would you describe
the
that?
shadow puppets
It's shadow puppets. It's 2-dimensional shadow puppets that are puppeted by wire rather than string.
Yes, and
that
we're talking about for the flashback sequences. The whole movie wasn't this way. Just if anyone's,
I'd watch a whole movie.
If anyone's is listening to this and hasn't seen it or knows nothing about it, no, Tim's specifically referring to there are flashback sequences done in a shadow puppet telling style.
Yeah, the design of that was so incredibly effective, and just such a nice, like, I think, the first reference, there's 2 references that come to mind of films that use this device of, like, if you're gonna do flashbacks, let's change it up, right? Like, let's leave the real world depiction of that and actually do something different. Because it is a story, and humans have been using many different mediums for storytelling. And so I think it's really cool to get a different medium and in this, the folklore storytelling. Deathly Hallows, the Harry Potter movie, does it really effectively. The animation sort of sequence in that is super cool and actually reminded me slightly of this version. Made me wonder if the same, like, design team did those, but probably not. Also, Kill Bill does it, right? There's a whole animated flashback section of Kill Bill. So I think it's effective, and I enjoyed it.
What's neat about this one is that it's as if this same technique could have been being used to tell the story in the 1800s in the 1800s. It's the same technology that's been available since then. So it's sort of...
it's been available throughout time in a way, right? Like we as humans have always had a fire source and done shadows on the wall to depict stories and, like, carry those stories on. So that's something I just think it's rooted in humanity and storytelling. So it's really cool. One aspect of when they were doing it that really stood out to me is the initial time that we get that device used is being told by Burke, I believe, about the Candyman story of the first movie. And there are tiny details in his telling of the story that are inaccurate. And I immediately was like, this is so smart, because that is the root of lore. It's a malleable thing. The teller always gets to, adjust the story for their, to the effect that serves their version. And I love that, because that is kind of, on a macro level, what this movie is doing as well. It's taking a previous telling of a story and putting its own flavor on it. And now, granted, in this one, they're also connecting it to that story. So, but it's just, it's so deeply layered in all of that stuff that I was like, oh, that's right. Like, anytime a folklore type story or like, what's the other say a thing in the mirror thing, Bloody Mary.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I bet you regionally, every time you go to a different place and somebody knows of the Bloody Mary sort of thing, their depiction of it is going to be slightly different. So that, I think that's what I'm getting at, is that's just a truism in lore. That it's always got a little bit of a flavor, different sort of versions of that. But it is ultimately, or often, based in some truth.
Well, you just got me thinking, like, the media, that to have an animated medium or a shadow puppet medium, I guess that's not quite, I don't know. Does that constitute as animation? I don't know. Whatever. It is inherently effective and perfect for kind of telling a legend or lore for those exact reasons you're saying, is because we get the broad strokes and the important things, the details, like the visual details in this case. There's a lot that's left to the imagination that we're still built around. Yet there's a core effectiveness that's still at play that feels like the truth coming through. You know what I mean at all? Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's like, yeah, it's the Candyman legend. Like to see it in just regular shot, like people, like History Channel reenactments, it would just totally undercut it. Because then you would just go, oh, this is exactly what happened. Even if it is supposed to be altered or not exactly what happens, that's the sense we get if we're watching real actors in the reenactments. Versus this way, it is just straight up lore legend.
Yeah, and it leaves a lot of the a lot of what you're getting from the story is left for you to construct in your imagination, which often is way more effective, right? Like it's almost like a show less kind of rule so that you fill in the gaps, which is awesome. And that sort of ties in slightly in terms of the sort of like what you're saying, the getting to the truth, like finding the truth in that the actual plot of this and in our main character, like Anthony, like his story in this is really to find the truth of himself. It is a search. It's his search to figure out who he is, and you can use that on a surface level of like we're all trying to figure out who we are, what our purpose is. In art, we're often trying to figure out what our artistic purpose is, or like who we are as an artist. But it goes much deeper in his narrative or it extends for him into who is he as an artist, who is he as an individual, what's the truth of his actual life, but then who is he as a Black man in the US, and then who is he in relation to this lore of Black men who have been wrongfully, or the injustice of Black men in the history of the US. Like it's extending throughout all of those things. And he ultimately becoming the lore is such a cool journey to watch. I mean, him at the end where his face is obscured by the bees is some of the coolest and most like poignant imagery for this story. Because he effectively becomes the lore and he becomes faceless.
Tim, you describing it that way,
it's insanely genius to me.
Well, you describing it that way of he's becoming the lore. That's so cool. It's so cool because like just kind of connected to what we were already talking about, how, you know, as if there's an effort to erase history, as if it's not a part of us. There's this, there's this very human, God, how do you describe it? Human, I don't know. What's the word for like trick
condition?
Experience? I don't know. But you'll get what I mean. That when something that could one day be a part of lore and very likely will be is happening then and there, it doesn't really feel like it. Like it might, like you might have this sort of like sense in your chest or, whoa, this is historical, this is important. But at the same time, it's also just like, no, this is just your reality happening. This is the visceralness of like getting his hand chopped off and a hook shoved in it, you know? It's
Dude,
like,
that scene. Oh, man.
Right. But it's like you're being directly confronted with that fact of, oh, this is all this stuff that's lore and legend, and maybe I'd like to think is just shadow puppets actually is. It's just people experiencing experience. I don't know how else to put it. It's it just closes that gap of disconnect that we can have with history, forgetting that history is also happening right now, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's both cinematically pleasing and just exciting to watch as a movie, like as a visual thing, but also deeply, deeply rooted in an actual history. And then thematically, you know, intensely connected to the history and to the you know, the just, it's a movie. And I think that's incredible. Like, I guess that's kind of my point. That's my larger point. In the movies that we've watched that I've been the most thrilled by, some version of that is happening. There's an interconnectivity or a intersectionality, I guess, of deep historical truth and a good story depiction that is compelling. And when you get those two things working in conjunction with each other, like intersecting properly, I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm in. This is everything I want.
Well, I feel like that could be a good segue to our big finale, because I feel like that's another major thing we both want to touch on.
Yeah, absolutely. I have two things stand out in particular about the finale to me. Number one, the deeply tragic component of the trauma that has driven Burke to inflict this horror onto a fellow Black man says so much about how trauma affects us as human beings. So far, and like even as far as inflicting that pain onto somebody who is like you, which is obviously very counterintuitive, right? Like you would think, and we see this is a very common thing in trauma, that as the victim of trauma, you inadvertently often inflict that same pain onto people close to you. And that's the cycle of that thing. And it goes on and on and on forever unless you can somehow break it. And you obviously can't break it if the world you live in is constantly putting its boot on your neck. So that that felt so deeply tragic to me. Like that character is having that experience and inflicting that pain on people that I don't think anybody deserves to have pain inflicted on them. But like in this case, in this story, the people we care the most about are getting the worst. And second to that, this is the first movie we've watched, I think, where the quote unquote final girl never does the tropey wrong thing. In every instance that Brianna is faced with a horror trope, like don't go in there kind of thing, she chooses the right, she makes the correct choice, the choice of not falling into the trap or the trope. Like remember, she goes in, she opens a basement door, and you're like, oh, don't go down there. And she literally goes, nope, and closes the door and walks away.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right? It's so genius. I mean, later and she's the solve, right? Like she solves the problem. She's faced with this bullshit binary choice of either tell the version of the story that the cop tells you to tell so you can save yourself, or you're an accomplice. Those are your options. Neither is good. So she just says, well, I'm not going to do either of those. I'm not going to take the false choice. I'm going to inflict my intergenerational trauma onto you, which is insanely brilliant to me.
By doing what?
By evoking her the new version of Candyman, who is her boyfriend. Like, talk about a messed up choice. She's essentially sealing the deal by doing that.
Moment was my other favorite moment in the film. Maybe that is my favorite moment, is her decision to summon Candyman there. It's like so obvious, yet I didn't see it coming, and is just so satisfying, like for so many reasons, especially just when you're caught up in the movie kind of way, you know.
Yeah. oh my God.
When
Like,
she
give me a
started doing
break.
it. Right. When she started doing it, I was just like, oh my God, yeah, she's going to show these fucking guys. Like, I was so happy.
Yeah, Satisfying is barely even scratches the surface. Like, it is ridiculously cathartic. So that's really it for me. I mean, I love that they were like, yeah, we're not going to fall for it. We're not going to do the trope. We're going to actually anti-trope it. We're going to show her being faced with the trope and have her choose the better thing so that we don't, I mean, I get it. Like, those tropes exist for a reason, right? Like, it's affecting for the audience to be like, no, don't go in there. Or no, like, don't run up the stairs, run out the front door. Like, what are you doing? That's fun. But this isn't the movie for that. Right? Like, you sort of do a disservice to that character if you have her doing those things.
Yeah.
I could talk about this a lot more, but there's really only one other thing that I want to mention that kind of sealed the deal. The gore notwithstanding, because I love all of that, and that sawing the handoff scene is holy shit. Amazing. The gore is so good. His decay is so good. All of that. The design is incredible. The design of this other version of Candyman, the one that's sort of throughout the movie, not the Tony Todd version, but then having Tony Todd be in there at the very end as well. All of that's brilliant. But I think the thing that kind of hit me the most was the scene with Vanessa Williams and realizing that is the character from the first movie, and that he is the baby from the first movie. And her performance in that scene is so good. Every little detail about it is fantastic. Even down to the scar on her arm, like putting her in a sleeveless shirt so that we can see her arm, and having the scar from when Helen hit her with the butcher knife in the first movie. Like, all of that is so pleasing and really, like, I mean, I don't know if Vanessa Williams has been like what her career has been like, but she's crushing. I mean, she crushed it in the first movie. Like, her performance in the first movie is exceptional as well. And seeing her in this with a sort of a different version of that, a more subdued, but like same energy, obviously same character. Like, damn it. It's just so good. So there's many other things in this movie that are fantastic, but like, you know, we would have a 4-hour episode if we kept going.
Well, if you give your actor MVP shout out, I agree. She was incredible, and it made me all that much more sad I didn't watch the first one leading into it. It kept, I need to see it again too, just because it kept throwing me for a loop how she looked exactly the same. I know that's superficial or whatever, but like, I'm like was really thrown off at first, not having just had the continuity from the first one. I'm like, wait, she's his mom? What? She looks so young.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's superficial
Good
detail,
genes.
but my MVP actor shout out is for Coleman Domingo as William Burke. Like, the way he carried the weight of not just his own personal history of that story of seeing Candyman as a kid, which was a great opening sequence, by the way, too, of just him coming out of the wall, felt rooted to the original,
so good.
All that stuff. But he also just carried that whole weight of that ineffable thing I was trying to describe earlier of like, what even is Candyman? Where it's like he carried that weight of coming to terms with he can never quite define what it is, yet he knows what it is, yet he feels what it is, yet he has a sense of the historical, the history that Candyman has and all that. He just carried that weight. His voice and look was just so spot on for like exactly who you want that character to be. Yeah, I mean, and then it was fun having the connections with, I guess maybe it was new material recorded with Virginia Madsen and her voice.
I think so, yeah.
Which is amazing. And then, of course, Tony Todd's visage coming back just that little bit. But like whatever that kind of weight that Tony Todd brought to the role, and just the idea of Candyman more, I should say, which is why it's so great they still worked him in. I think William Burke, Coleman Domingo playing William Burke, he carried forth that weight that's so important for this film, for this series, for this character.
Yeah. And also, one last thing, just shout out to the end credits. Using that puppetry, two-dimensional puppetry thing to depict these examples of injustice.
And the space of the artist gallery.
In the space of the artist gallery.
Yeah.
That was so genius. I really felt like there were, I don't know, 10 people maybe in the theater where I watched it. But like half of them left right as the credits started rolling. I was like, you guys fucked up.
Well, it's because
Like,
the
you need to
stupid
sit down
lights
and
go
watch.
on as soon as it ends. I hate that so much. I hate it. Oh my God.
But man, you do yourself a disservice if you don't stay and watch that. It's super powerful.
Yeah, I love that.
So.
Credits as an extension and part of the film itself. The movie's not over yet, folks.
That's right. All right. Well, that's it for me. I mean, that's not really it for me, but that's, I think, in the interest of brevity.
Somewhat. Well, yeah, no, let's figure out. I'm still trying to make heads or tails of how I felt about some things. So do you want to do that in the next section here?
Yeah.
All right.
I'd love to hear what you've got.
All right, here we go. Next section. What did not work?
It's not ready yet.
Seems to work okay.
No, something important's missing.
What did not work?
All right, so again, not quite what did not work, but I'm still trying to suss out some things here, Tim.
Okay.
Obviously, I love body horror so much, and I get the metaphor, but I didn't know how to feel in this first viewing of his decay from the bee sting. Either it felt like, did I actually need it? Was it just too, okay, it's a metaphor, I get it, whatever? Did it have any consequences in the end? Was it just sort of that it tied to, I don't know, other things I may have had with this film where it just kind of felt rushed overall? Like if we had more time with it, like, I don't know. How did you feel about and digest his decay? His physical decay.
Yeah. I thought it was working on the level of body horror, and like it was gnarly. I mean, I was like, oh God,
Agreed.
I hate this.
Agreed.
But I love it. In terms of like the sort of, I don't know what you would even call it, the efficacy of the of the point of it. I was okay with it just sort of serving as like a physical representation of the infection of the lore. Like that's kind of how I viewed it. Like it was taking him over. Now, I wondered, and Britt, when we were watching it, she was like, "Oh, is he being burnt because because Candyman originally wanted him to burn in the bonfire? Is that what we're seeing? Like that's actually a burn evolving on him?" And
Right.
I don't know, but that's an interesting idea.
Well, no, right. That's exactly what I was thinking too. If it was something that was more tied to like he's turning into Candyman, like if it was rather than the bee sting idea, that he's initially burned and then that's the thing that spreads, which I guess was a weird give take because a burn, I don't think necessarily, you think of causing an infection like that. But just, I don't know, it maybe if it had been more tied to like this is his part of his setting up as well as leading to his transformation. I don't know.
Well, maybe there's a different way of looking at it. Let's say that what they're getting at is that he is turning into Tony Todd's Candyman in particular. The bee sting actually makes sense that that's the impetus because because Daniel Robitaille ultimately died of bee stings. And so if it's starting with that as sort of the representation of his death, that's what's potentially growing. Rather than a burn, it's more that your body can handle one bee sting, but it can't handle all of them, which then becomes sort of a metaphor for, you as a person can handle being, let's say a black person, you can handle being whatever horrible thing that you have to experience. One time is fine, but when you're connected to all of the times, like as an extension of like all of the bee stings, it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Like you can handle one paper cut, but you can't handle 1,000. Like it will overtake you. And I think maybe there's something in that I can use to justify this progression of decay or whatever it is. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'm okay with it being ambiguous.
Well, here,
I think because it gets you thinking.
Well, then, yeah, let me put it just in the context. Again, this is just very like first viewing context here. On the first viewing, like I kind of just said, the pacing overall, I don't know. It just felt like rushed to me. I wanted it to be like 5-10 minutes longer. So his non-physical transformation into his descent into madness and obsession with the Candyman legend, it felt like that was ramping up so well, but then all of a sudden it just like just someone flipped a switch and it was just like off to the races a bit quickly. Like I felt like I stopped being with him in his descent, or like I wasn't observing it as much as I'd like to, or seeing that progression, like those beats. Again, maybe it's just because I was, again, like first viewing missing it, but it just felt rushed and short in that sense. So I think maybe that's where I'm coming from with that experience, where it's just like all of a sudden then on top of what's already happening, so much to take in, he's also has a bee sting that's infecting his whole body. Like it was just a lot. It was just happening quickly. And so in that context, very first viewing, you could see that it was enough without that for me. Yeah. It was already almost too much without that.
Well, I almost wonder, again, I would have to sit down and watch it a couple more times to really be able to assess this. But I wonder if we needed one more kind of scene with him where he's pushing back against the, whatever you want to call it, this sort of possession or trance or obsession that he's experiencing, where he has to snap himself out of it. And we get to see him struggle with it in recognition of it one time, right? Kind of in the middle of all of that, before things really kind of go off the rails.
Yeah, because it kind of feels like it's almost a protagonist switch, or at least a sort of who we're sympathizing with switch, where it kind of the scene where she feels threatened by him and wants to get the hell out of there. That was where it's just kind of like, I don't know, where did that come from? And then all of a sudden we're with her, and what's going on with him? I don't know. And then
that's true. We didn't get that one sort of moment where he scares her and then comes back and says, "I'm sorry, actually I'm okay." Which is something you generally do get, so that when he fails to be okay, we feel more sort of weight to it. So yeah, maybe I could see that.
I don't know. And similarly, I don't know, just as far as it feeling rushed, like I bought acting wise, like her intensity when she's stabbing the dude at the end. She stabs him like 20 times or whatever. But like in that moment, it just felt like so just like, whoa, we're here all of a sudden. Where did this just, I don't know. And again, this is all just probably first time viewing, taking it in, but just felt like I just wasn't with her in that, whatever she was going through in that moment. And maybe that's just because I can't relate as much as one would like or hope, but it felt it was more just the sort of the characters who we were with at any given time we weren't with her enough. I don't know.
Well, I had a feeling or a thought about that, in that I put that under the anti-trope category for the final girl. Instead of like often what we see in that moment in other films is that the final girl, stabs the bad guy in the eye once, and then that's it and it's done, and then the bad guy comes back to life and like comes after her again, right? We get the double jump, whatever. To me, it kind of felt like, oh, she's again not falling into the trope. She's finishing him off.
It's
now
this, huh?
I was going to say, now I also got a bit of a sense of that there was a lot more in the act, because this is what's called overkill in sort of true crime terms, right? Like, generally speaking, if you stab somebody like 2 or 3 times, like they're pretty much good. Like they're dead already. Like you've killed them. And overkill cases is this thing of like, you just get caught in this like sort of seeing red thing or whatever it is. I mean, depending on who the killer is, of just like you lose it and you overkill. You just keep going and keep going and keep going. So I don't know. I mean, I personally took it and was like, it kind of feels appropriate, to be honest. Like, it feels like she just saw some really, really messed up stuff, and she's had a really fucked up week.
Yeah.
I kind of was like, yeah, I'm with you. Cool. I think you would just go off. So I don't know.
It's weird, that whole, like I told you, I loved how it all played out with that, her summoning Candyman at the end. All that was great. The sort of the lead up to that finale in the church, super cool. But
oh yeah,
I don't know. It was weird, like thinking about how you said, yeah, she didn't end up doing these beats or whatever. That's great. But I wonder from that point on, like there needed to be something else to compensate for that. It just sort of, again, it felt like something rushed, or like there was, I don't know, just something more in that ending, whether it's like a physical location thing or a time spent somewhere thing, where it just felt like it was just kind of, I don't know, just missing something. And I'm not one to like, I'm usually deriding the huge, unnecessarily big, like, ending. So I'm not,
right.
So I'm trying to be careful here, but it's just why it feels weird to say, because it's usually not the thing I'm arguing for, to say a bit more. But again, I don't know. This is all just my first viewing stuff. I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, I could see a different depiction of this where they like, end up on the roof of a, project skyscraper, and the whole finale takes place there, and it's this big scope sort of epic thing, and maybe somebody falls off the roof and that's the ending, blah blah blah. Like,
I wouldn't want that. See, that's too much. I don't know.
Well, that's kind of my point, is that like we've seen that and we know what that feels like and looks like, but that would not serve this story.
Yeah, I think maybe
having it in the low rise like abandoned projects of Cabrini Green on the street with the cops, like that all felt really right.
Yeah,
to me.
That all feels right. Again, I just probably need to see it again, where it's like I was kind of confused on what exactly the dude's motivation was, William Burke's motivation was in wanting to make the Candyman, and then like she was all of a sudden our protagonist still, but I was still wanting to like Anthony, but what happened with him? Like, what? I don't know. It was just,
right.
It was just a lot to take in, which is just my initial impression was like, just, I don't know. I just wanted to put it as simply as like, make it 10 minutes longer. And then that's just, that would have taken care of.
Maybe it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always hard to know.
Anyway, this makes me want to say it again. The only thing, I can only say one thing definitively that did not work for me, or that was on the negative spectrum. It's like, fine, whatever, I get it. I'm for it in the sense of, for practical filming reasons, I will just say I miss the day and age where you could have real bees on set, stinging your actors for like in a contract. I think it was like he gets $10,000 for every sting, $1,000 every sting that happens. Like whatever that is. There's just, I'm sorry, CG insects just aren't there yet for me. And there's something just like with real ones in nature that like the ants and the bees, it just would have been tied so well to this, like, and the story and everything at play, just been like real ants eating a real bee body. I know that sounds so picky, but it's just like, that's what we're doing here, right? Is we're just trying to put these clean demarcations when we have them to try to elevate these films even more, hopefully.
Yeah.
And that's, and I say that so conflictedly too, is because I'm all for like, I don't want another Braveheart to be made with, you know, dealing with horses like that, you know, like it's and if I should be able to extend that same philosophy to bees, which are all dying now too. So like, I get it. I
tried to save a bee the other day. It didn't work.
Like, I get it. It's great. We have CG, so use it. But unfortunately, it's still not there for me.
Yeah. I only had one thing that kind of left me, to be honest, it left me wanting more, a little more something, which was Brianna's dad's storyline and how that was a part of her life and what that kind of meant. I mean, we get that he kind of, his own art or maybe inability to create, maybe I might be kind of pulling that out of inferring that, but drove him to kill himself, and how that has affected her. Like, it's there in the movie, but I kept waiting for it to tie into something bigger, and it never did. So I don't know. I don't know if having that is necessary to serving her character arc, or if it is something that they used as a jumping off point for further movies, possibly, which I could get behind. But I don't know. It was the only thing in the movie that kind of left me scratching my head a tiny bit.
Got it. Cool. Well, if that's all,
but that's that's it. That's the only thing. Everything else,
if that's all we got to suss out, then we got one more big section here. You ready for it?
Oh yeah.
Things of note.
Things of note.
This should be interesting.
Well, I doubt that puppet, the puppetry, who made the puppetry, was the same as the Harry Potter people, because this was all rooted in. This is all Chicago-based, is how they tried to treat everything for this film, or default to everything. So the puppetry animation sequences, shout out, were created by Chicago-based puppet theater company Manual Cinema. There you go.
Awesome. You killed it.
This is for future people listening to this. This is one of the films from the era, films that were much delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was originally scheduled to be released June 12th, 2020. And we got a release eventually. And then that went from September 25th, 2020. Then again to October 16th, 2020. And we finally got our release August 27th, 2021.
Sheesh.
Yeah. Great. What did you have?
I haven't really dove in much. Yeah, I don't really have anything. The Halloween Kills trailer was at the front of this. That got me excited.
I'm sure I closed my eyes for that. I did.
Good. That's smart, because I didn't. And I mean, I think it's going to be a cool movie.
Yeah.
But I kind of
gathered-
wish I hadn't watched it.
I like give myself my own little trailer where it's like I'll open my eyes a little quickly here and there during the first half. I think I caught a bit at the beginning. Like now I know like they explain how he survived all that. Like it's just, whatever.
You know what I think is I love that Wikipedia has this already. The movie has been out for 2 days. Like I guess today would be the third day.
No, I saw it as of longer ago. I saw it last week, dude.
Did you?
Yeah.
Wait. Oh, that's right. You're right. It came out on the 27th. Okay, so so what would that be? 27, 8, 9, 10th. What, we have 31 days in August? Yeah. So in a week, essentially, it's made 27 million in the US. That's pretty good for the times that we're living in.
Yeah, I think it grossed that on top of what, a $25 million budget?
Something like that. Yeah, right in the
here
or so.
a
Yeah,
worldwide
25.
total of 32.5 million. So good on Candyman. It's cool.
In a week. Good job. I mean, especially considering right now when I think far fewer people are going to the theater.
Yeah.
This was my first theater experience.
Oh, crazy.
Since the pandemic started.
How was that?
It was fine. I mean, we went in the early evening, so like a 5:45 showing. And I mean, typically I went to the Americana in Glendale. I've never really been there and had it be busy. So I assumed it would be fairly empty. And it was, like I said, maybe 10 people were in there. It was fine.
Well, just was it like just like you were at a movie yesterday, or was there anything as far as like, whoa, seeing something on a big screen and loud again?
A little bit, yeah. A little bit of that, like, oh, this is nice to be back kind of feeling. Like there was some intense surround sound happening, and I was like, oh, damn, yeah, that's good. I missed that.
Cool.
So, yeah. I wore my glasses too, which is always good. Like I often forget to wear my glasses and then like regret it because I'm like, I am blind now, apparently. So that was nice.
Cool. You could see the movie you were going to see.
I could see.
Well, when
always important.
We were talking about its budget gross. Let's just say that all had to do with some of the marketing behind it. I didn't even know Snapchat was still a thing, but apparently, how do they describe it here? There was a stunt activation is made. That's a social media Snapchat term of like, do this thing, where they made a Snapchat filter that would dare the users to tweet Candyman 5 times, which would then, result in it trending, which it did. But yeah, the trailer did really well, all that stuff. So anticipation was indeed high for this film. We're hungry for it.
I also heard that, I didn't do this or see it, but I heard that then their website, you get a blank page, and if you said Candyman 5 times, it would open a hidden page.
That's really cool.
Did you see that anywhere?
I mean, I'm on the official website right now. It doesn't still function that way, but I feel like,
man.
I heard that. That's
cool.
I
heard that existed, and I did not follow up to see what that was all about. But that's pretty ballsy, to be honest, because like, you are then, for all intents and purposes, looking at a mirror when you do that.
Yeah.
Smart.
Cool.
What is your take on actually saying it in the mirror?
What do you mean, my take on it?
Like, would you do that and feel comfortable doing it and not think anything of it?
I don't actually think something would happen, but I don't feel the urge to do it. And
that's exactly where I land with it.
And if someone dared me to, that would make me want to do it less.
Yeah, me too. For me, it's like, in no way do I think there's anything to it, but all things being equal,
yeah,
I'm not going to tempt fate. How's that sound?
I come down on, I love movies so much, and kind of maybe I do prescribe deep down onto kind of the unified field theory. Like everything is real in some
right.
regard. Like on some base level of existence, if you're able to zoom out that far or zoom in that far, like we are, Tim and Ryan are as real as characters as like characters in this movie, like on some base level of existence. And so I think like in my chest, I feel like a respect for people and situations in movies and TV shows. So it just feels like gross. I don't know. It just feels weird to me to be like, nah, it's fake. Like, I don't know. It's like movies are too special for me. And I think I don't know, to kind of have fun in dismissing that they are just movies. Like, I feel like that's what that sort of urge comes from, to like, I don't know, to kind of just poo-poo something. Oh, it's not real. It's like, yeah, but it's not, but it is, like in other ways.
Yeah.
So I just, too much of a, films are too special for me to kind of, I don't know. And maybe I tie what you're saying. Do I have that? That's why I don't have an urge. That urge to do that, to like set up a Candyman ritual. Again, it sounds fun in the spirit of the movie in the way as a film fan. But at the same time, it feels like you're just kind of saying, just a movie is like the sort of instinct that I attach to people who would do that.
Right. I also think it's noteworthy to talk about Nia DaCosta, and just like, I mean, this movie is incredible, and it is effectively her first major feature film. Like, she has one other feature.
I really want to see it. Little Woods with Tessa Thompson.
Yeah, exactly. And that Little Woods. So I've come to understand something. If you get into the Sundance Screenwriters and Directors Lab, that's a really good thing for your career.
It means you'll direct a Marvel movie.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like Quentin Tarantino got into it, and that like really helped kickstart his career. And obviously, a large number of now successful directors and writers have gone through that.
Yeah, I know she's the first Black woman to have a -- grossing film, and she's 30.
She's 30. That's amazing. So Little Woods came out of that, was what was accepted to the Sundance Screenwriter Lab, Directors Lab. And she made a short film version of it, low budget, and then that led to a feature version, which we should watch because she's clearly exceptionally talented.
And because I know you can answer this, Tim, what do we have to look forward to with what is the Marvel film she's doing? Why should we be excited about it? Why is she a good choice for it?
Okay, so the sequel to Captain Marvel, which had Brie Larson in it, is going to be called The Marvels, and it will involve multiple, well, likely, I don't think there's actual like press release on this, but it will involve a number of characters that sort of fall under the Marvel banner. Miss Marvel is one, Ms. Marvel is one, Kamala Khan is another. Like, so that movie will involve those entities most likely, and it'll be out. I think they're filming or about to start filming. Release date is 2022, November. But yeah, she will be the youngest director.
Okay, but
what
are the Marvels? Why is she good for? What can we expect?
I mean, that's a long conversation. Okay, so Captain Marvel, if anybody saw Captain Marvel is the product of an alien being, a Kree being, coming to Earth and getting in an accident with Carol Danvers, who becomes imbued. Her DNA gets changed and she has cosmic powers, so to speak. So that's Captain Marvel. They slightly changed the origin in the movie, but it's essentially, that's the gist of it. And through the comic, history, that same power has affected a handful of other characters in various ways, whether it was through contact with Captain Marvel himself or herself, whichever version. Kamala Khan was the first.
Okay, sorry to cut you off. I got it. So there's a power that Brie Larson got, and these are all the people who got that same power. Why are you excited?
Essentially, it's sort of a cosmic power. It shows up in various forms. Like your powers are slightly different
now,
based on who you are.
Aside from Nia DaCosta just being overall director to watch, and she's good, and we should be excited. Why are you excited about her doing this film?
Well, for starters, it's a woman director doing largely women-centric heroes. I think that's important. She's young, so I think it's good to have somebody of that generation. She would be a millennial, or I think she'd be considered a millennial, or like late millennial, early Gen Z, taking on characters that actually span a couple generations as well. So like Kamala Khan is a teenager, and she gets these powers, and how is that going to affect her as a teenager? So it's smart to have somebody in the middle of those generations to be helming this, so that you can kind of bridge the gap in perception of what that experience might be like. So I think it'll be fun. I also think it's really important. I say this as a director who works as a directing team. Myself and my directing partner Shane, like we're a duo that make films. But I think that there are certain properties that benefit more from singular vision, and I think the hero Marvel stuff has seemed to be the case. The first Captain Marvel was a duo director team that I think there were too many cooks in the kitchen with that movie, and it didn't actually end up being as good as it could have been. So I'm excited to see like a singular vision person come in, and like somebody who's up and coming who can kind of be like, no, this is what we're doing. So hopefully that it works out and is a good movie.
God, I hope they let her make her movie. I'm just...
Yeah, it's hard to know. We've seen, historically there've been 3 or 4 directors who have bowed out of Marvel films because of feeling like they couldn't get their vision made. So hard to know.
I'm hoping Sam Raimi gets to make a Sam Raimi movie for Doctor Strange 2.
That's going to be a weird one because he came in, not late in the game, but like midway through kind of. So we'll see how that affects it.
Interesting.
I mean, Edgar Wright bowed out of Ant-Man.
Yeah.
And that, you could kind of see the like remnants of Edgar Wright in that movie.
Yeah.
Hard to know.
Cool. Well, all right. I think that's it then for our things of note, meaning we can wind down from Candyman, and we like to wind down with some recommenDEADtions. If we've gotten anything for each other, for you, stuff we've been watching, consuming, enjoying. You got anything, Tim?
Oh, man. I mean, is it inappropriate to say you should go watch the first Candyman like that? I think that
no, it's a different. As long as it's different from what we're talking about, it's okay.
I really think you should go do that. I think watching the first Candyman kind of, man, it's an important horror film in the pantheon of horror. Like it's doing a different thing, and I think that the proof is in the pudding. Like obviously, what it was doing had an effect and led us to this current version. So, yeah, go watch that. That's my recommenDEADtion.
Go watch Candyman 1992.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll recommenDEAD something. I checked to see. It feels like it's one I might have recommended before, but it's just one of my I don't know, in the last 5 years is kind of my one of my new go-to, just new favorites, I guess. Something I'll just come back to just when need to be put in a certain mood or just feel good or whatever. And that is Ed Wood, the Tim Burton film from 1994, where it just seems like it's on the level too, or we're like, I'll mention it to people and they'll be like, oh no, I haven't heard of it. Or like, oh yeah, I think I maybe saw it, or kind of, like that kind of thing.
Really?
But I mean, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice are like my favorite movies, but if I have to like look at it more objectively, I could argue how Ed Wood is Tim Burton's masterpiece. And if you're at all a fan of movies about making movies, like don't overlook this one. This one's just so inspiring, especially if you're a filmmaker, just to get in touch with all that you love about making movies. The era that it takes place in, and just the comedy and tone is just so unique and particular, and just that like oddball enough. The cast is great. If it's been a while or if you've never seen it, please check out Ed Wood. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think subsequently you should definitely watch Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Yeah, it's the natural double screening. Yeah.
That's right.
Cool,
dude.
Well, for next week, is it my turn to say when when you pull from the hat?
Sure.
All right. Well, I saw that. I think I'm right.
I don't know.
All right. And
might as well be.
When?
Oh, this is a long one. Here we go. I got to unfold it. Can you see that?
Speaking of older films from the era, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman from 1943.
Cool.
We were getting some requests for more, films of this sort and this era, especially the Universal ones and the spin-off ones. So yeah, this is one. God, I don't know if I've seen it since I was a kid. So
I don't think I've ever seen it.
Great, be fun, and it'll be good. We're in September now, so rather than the 31 days of October, which has the 60 days of Halloween here at Dismembering Horror.
We already bought a bunch of Halloween stuff. We're gearing up.
Oh, great. Awesome. So this feels in line for just getting in that mood already. This should be fun.
Oh, totally.
All right. Well, in the meantime, you can find us wherever you found us. We got an Instagram. We encourage you. Check out where you can tease you what's coming up, post stills, all that fun stuff. If you've made it this far, our big ask is you do tell a friend. But either way, no matter what, we really appreciate you being here. So, in closing, Candyman, 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 Candyman.
Don't do it.
I'm looking at Tim to decide if he's going to say it or not.
I will not. I refuse.
Thanks for listening.
Yes, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.